Problem code 2. Problem code 2. Problem code 2. Problem code 2. Goodbye.
The second thing is, please don't put your phone on hold. Even though you're already on mute, we might still be able to hear your music on hold if you've got that feature on your phone. So while we love elevator music, we really don't want to hear it during this presentation. So if you have to step away, just go ahead and make sure your phone is muted. We won't notice that you're gone for a few minutes, and then just come back in. Now let's get the legalese out of the way. This webinar is part of the SERI, the State Electronic Records Initiative program, developed by COSA, the Council of State Archivists, as part of an NHPRC grant. The purpose of the grant is to provide access to in-depth information about standards, best practices, and tools for electronic records management and preservation programs, and to deliver education and training to ensure that these standards, best practices, and tools are widely and effectively implemented. It is also being offered in conjunction with an IMLS Laura Bush 21st Century Library Program grant to provide the states and territories with electronic records education. And finally, this webinar is one of the prerequisites that all Introductory Institute attendees are encouraged to attend or view. Now, this course was developed to provide background in OAIS and its vocabulary. We want you to become familiar with the terms and a general overview of OAIS and how it functions so that you will feel more confident at your institute. Now, this webinar won't make you an OAIS expert, but hopefully by the end of the webinar you will be more familiar with the terms and concepts. So if you have any questions during the presentation, go ahead and type something in the chat box and we'll try and answer it for you. Okay, just to make things clear, today we're going to be discussing OAIS, Open Archival Information Systems. We're not going to be talking about tropical greenery and palm trees in the desert. In the simplest of terms, an OAIS is an archive consisting of an organization of people and systems that has accepted the responsibility to preserve information and make it available for a designated community. It's interesting to note that the open in OAIS does not require that the archives have open access, nor that they have open architecture. Because many of us are interested in history, I thought you might like to know how OAIS got started. A subgroup of NASA, the Consultative Committee for Space Data Systems, was established in 1982 to develop standards for data handling in the support of space research. Beginning in 1994, the committee worked with the International Standards Organization to take what had been developed and evolve it into an ISO standard. In 2002, OAIS had become a recommended standard, which was designated by a blue book, and in 2003, OAIS became an ISO standard, ISO 14721. The most current version, the Magenta book, was revised in 2012 after a 5-year review. Now, early on, OAIS became a focal point for discussion of digital preservation terms and the ideas among a variety of professionals, including librarians and archivists. This is somewhat surprising since the effort and scope of the original CCSDS was all about data related to the study of terrestrial and space environments. As an ISO standard, OAIS provides a framework to understand archival concepts needed for long-term digital information preservation and access, describe and compare architectures and the operation of existing and future archives, describe and compare different long-term preservation strategies and techniques, and finally expand other efforts for the long-term preservation of non-digital information, physical media, and physical samples. Now, this actually seems funny to us because most of us are much more comfortable talking about long-term preservation of non-digital information. The ISO standard also lets you compare data models and how they might change over time. It also provides the concepts needed by non-archival organizations so that they can be effective participants in the preservation process. By expanding consensus on the elements and processes for long-term digital information preservation, the ISO standard promotes a larger market which vendors can support. For those of you who want to go directly to the source or you really need some good bedtime reading, the reference model publication can be downloaded or ordered as a print copy. Now, the easiest way I found was to go in and Google OAIS Magenta, and one of the top results will be a PDF of the Magenta book. So those of you that need some help with your insomnia, this is really great reading. The information in the Magenta book can be expressed visually. This is a detailed version of what an OAIS looks like when you put all the pieces together. Now, I know it looks really complicated, but don't worry. We're going to start on a much more basic level. The Open Archival Information System, and we usually refer to it as OAIS model, is now widely accepted as the key standard for digital repositories. OAIS is extremely flexible and provides a roadmap to what a digital archive system should include, either for the design of new systems or to evaluate the capabilities of established digital repositories. It specifies such things as how digital information is entered into the system, what subsequent preservation strategies are taken, and how an end user would receive that information. It provides 4 basic things: a vocabulary, a simple data model, required responsibilities, and recommended functions. As archivists, we save records so that someone else will look at them at a later time. To do this, we need to define who our someone else is, or our designated community is, and then we have to include their interests and concerns. Now, each designated community has a very specific knowledge base, that is, what they collectively know. So if you're designing an OAIS for just the state archivists in the United States, you might be able to assume that there's a level of understanding about accessioning and describing records for long-term preservation. However, if you're determined that your designated community would be the patrons of a particular archive, you may need to assume that the patrons would have very little knowledge of archival practices and vocabulary, and you would need to adjust your OAIS accordingly. Now, the designated community is also fluid, that is, it can change over time. This means that updates may be required to some of the representation information. When you begin an OAIS project, you may want to select a broader definition of the designated community so that you will have fewer modifications to make later, and you may improve the chances that the information will be understandable to everyone in the original community. Because the designated community can change over time, it should be monitored to make sure that the content information is still understandable to them. This can be done using surveys, formal reviews, workshops, or individual interactions. All right, so who is your designated community? Why don't you think about that and type in the chat, who are you going to be designing an OAIS for? Who are you preserving digital information for? Remember, the designated community has a specific knowledge base, what they collectively know. Susan says researchers, legislatures, government offices. Yeah, that's probably one of our groups. Anybody else have any other ideas of who they would be designing their particular OAIS for? Who's your particular designated community? We have to think about who is going to be giving us information and ultimately who's going to be using it. So probably genealogists, there's another excellent one, researchers. Yeah, so this is what a lot of us, we want to think about this as we go along. Who are these people that we're going to be working with? And the general public. Yeah, some of us are going to be doing these systems, and it could be anyone who has an interest in the information that we're creating. So those are excellent choices. And you'll notice we're probably all going to have some of the same kinds of designated communities. So now that we have a better idea of who is going to be using our records, here's a more basic model of the OAIS. Now, take a look at it, but we'll keep coming back to it as we talk about the different parts of this throughout our webinar. Now, there are three basic parts of an OAIS model. There are the actors, which is composed of producers, managers, and consumers or users. There are the information packages, which is the digital information itself, and it's composed of content information and representation information that represents the information that is submitted, archived, and shared. And then finally, there are the actions or the functions that take place in the repository. Now, the actors are the people or systems who interact with the OAIS. There are three actors or roles in an OAIS system. The producer is the role played by those persons or client systems who provide the information to be preserved. On the other end of the spectrum is the consumer, who represents those persons or client systems who interact with the OAIS services to find the preserved information of interest and to access that information in detail. Now, management is the role played by those who set overall OAIS policy as one component in a broader policy domain. They're also responsible for managing the system and handling the information packets and the functions. All right, so let's take a few minutes and think about who our own OAIS actors would be. So you can go ahead and type your answers in chat. Tell me who some of your producers would be. And remember, the producers can be people and or systems. So who's going to be submitting information? Who are your particular producers? Susan says government agencies. Yeah, for most of us, in fact, government agencies probably may be the #1 supplier of information into our OAIS. You may have some other, and the government agencies can be at all levels, could be state, county, local, and that's probably who the majority of our producers are going to be. Now, our consumers would be, yeah, public, and we might have some donors too. The public donors very often provide information, as well as education centers. So those are all different producers we would have. All right, so let's talk about the other end. Who are our consumers going to be? who are the people that are going to use the information that we actually are saving in our archives. Those are the people that will come to us for queries. Those are the people that will be looking to extract information. So some of our consumers, and we mentioned some of them before, people like genealogists, maybe part of our consumers, students, the government employees. Not only are the government employees providing information, but they're also going to want to get information back out. So those are going to be some of our consumers. Now finally, who would be considered management? Snowden. I don't know about Snowden. Is he a consumer or a producer? That's a very good question. So, and then finally, our management, archivists. Yeah, us. We are the people that are going to actually be managing all of these repositories and how the information comes in and how we send it back out. So as you can see, many of us have very, very similar actors. Now, the information packages refer to the logical unit that includes both a digital object and the other types of information that should be associated with the digital object in order to preserve and provide meaningful access to it over time. Now, there are three types of information packages: SIPs, DIPs, and AIPs. And we're going to discuss each one in a little more detail. Now, this diagram shows where the three information packages are involved in the process. To help you relate the information packages to the actors, producers submit SIPs, management stores and manages AIPs, and finally, consumers receive DIPs. Now, a really easy way to remember the three types is to use the mnemonic SAD, SIP, AIP, and DIP. Because think about it this way. You would be really sad if you couldn't remember the order of information packages. All right, the SIP, the Submission Information Package, is the object that is submitted to the archives. That kind of makes sense. The SIP includes both the content information, which is the original digital record, plus representative information, the associated metadata required to manage the object over time. In a traditional archive, we would recognize that our SIPs are usually boxes of paper, photos, printed materials, tapes, anything that comes in to our archives. The SIP will usually include metadata that is supplied by the producer. The metadata may lack structure or might not be understood at all levels of the archive. Now, SIPs may come from other digital repositories, so having interoperable metadata standards will minimize efforts to add or ingest the material into the repository. On the other end of the process, we have the Dissemination Information Package, or DIP. A DIP includes part or all of one or more AIPs and is sent to the consumer by the OAIS. Think of the DIP as the equivalent to the photocopy that you allow a patron to take home with them. The OAIS supplies the object packaged as a DIP and is comprised of the object and relevant metadata. The knowledge base of the designated community guides the type and how much metadata to be supplied. We've already talked about how producers get information into the system. So tell me in chat, what type of package do producers send into the system? The types of packages that a producer can send in or submit would be known as what? An SIP, yes. And then we've also talked about consumers, how they get the information back out of the system, and they use which type of package. So the consumer gets which package? They get the DIP, the Dissemination Information Packet. So now we're going to focus on the middle part, This is what happens in the Archives section or the AIP. An Archival Information Package, or AIP, includes the content information plus the preservation description information. Remember that the content information includes the object itself plus its representative information. In our archives, this would be equivalent to what we have in our collections and are trying to preserve. AIPs are the information packages managed by the OAIS. And there are two main parts of an archival information package: the preservation description information and the representation information. The preservation description information, or the PDI, is part of the AIP. It provides the information needed to preserve the content and is composed of 4 sections: reference, fixity, provenance, and context. Now, reference information provides identifiers that allows outside systems to refer to a particular content information. Fixity information documents the authentication used to protect the content information from undocumented and unauthorized alteration. Examples of fixity information would include such things as checksum or a digital signature. Provenance information is similar to what we maintain for our paper records. It documents the origins of the content information, the chain of custody, preservation action history, and the key to maintaining authenticity. And finally, context information. Now note, this is different from content information. Context information describes how the content information relates to other information outside the information package. So there's a lot of little pieces that go into being able to keep an AIP together. The representation information is the information required to make the object intelligible to its designated community. And it can include such things as the hardware and software environment that is needed to view the content data object. Representation information provides one or more identifiers or systems of identifiers by which the content information may be uniquely identified. An example of this would be a sequence of bits representing text encoded as ASCII characters, and the text is English. So it's all those little bits and pieces that identifies how the digital item is being stored. All right, so far we identified the OAIS actors. So if you want to type in chat, tell me at least one of the actors. We said there are 3 of them. So who are the actors in an OAIS system? So the actors in an OAIS system, again, there are 3 of them. And producers is one of them. Okay, so the producers submit, consumers receive the information. So we have the beginning and the end, and then we have management. Management maintains and manages all the information. Excellent. All right, we've also identified 3 types of information packages. What would those be? What are the 3 types of information packages that we have in an OAIS? SIP, the Submission Information Packet. That's what comes into the system. DIP, which is the Dissemination Information Package, which is what comes out, and AIP, which is the Archival Information Package. And again, to help you remember that, remember the word SAD, Submission, Archival, and Dissemination Information Packages. Excellent. So now we're going to talk about the OAIS functions, or what actually happens in the middle of all of this. Now, there are 7 groups of actions or functions outlined in the OAIS. We will review 6 of these functions and what they do, but we're not going to go into great detail. Now, the 7th function, the bottom one, Common Services, includes the supporting services that must be in place for computer systems to operate and perform properly, such as backup and exception handling. While common services are necessary for an OAIS to function, they're not really a major focus of the reference model. The reference model focuses on the other 6. So the first is ingest functions, or how the object is brought into the digital archives. Ingest functions receive the submission, perform quality assurance, and generate the Archival Information Package, the AIP. Ingest functions also generate descriptive information and coordinate updates. So think of it this way. The content arrives, what will the OAIS accept, and how? Archival storage functions receive data as AIPs from the ingest functions, add them to the permanent storage, and manage the storage hierarchy. They also replace media, perform error checking, handle disaster recovery, and provide data for the consumer. So you think of the archival storage functions as the content is being stored and maintained. Again, what happens to the objects over time? Data management functions administer the OAIS database. They perform queries and generate reports. They also receive database updates. So consider database management functions as the content is kept, found, and updated. How does the OAIS track, retrieve, and then deliver objects as needed? Administrative functions are responsible for the overall operation of the archive system and manage system configuration and control physical access to the system. Other administrative functions include establishing standards and policies, conducting archival information updates, submitting audits, and activating requests. Customer service and negotiating submission agreements are also administrative functions. The administrative functions are how the OAIS is managed. So you think about how are those functions going to be coordinated over time. Now, access functions coordinate the access activities or restrictions of the OAIS. Who has access, how much access, when do they have access, etc. They also create the Dissemination Information Package, the DIP, and deliver the responses. So the access functions are how the content is actually delivered as needed. How will OAIS provide access to these digital objects? Finally, the preservation planning functions include the development of preservation strategies and standards. These functions also monitor the designated community. Are there any changes to the community? And develop packaging designs and migration plans. They also monitor the technology itself. These functions are how the content is preserved. How will the OAIS respond to evolving technology and requirements? Now, we all know that technology changes so quickly. What happens when we no longer have floppy disks or perhaps eventually CD-ROMs? So in summary, an OAIS is an organization of functions that assist with the long-term preservation and management of digital objects and make it available to a designated community. The designated community is the who that we are preserving the digital objects for. The designated community members share a specific knowledge base. Since the community can change over time, it is important to monitor the community to ensure that the content information is still understandable to them. Okay, so as we summarize an OAIS model, there are 3 parts of an OAIS, and we're going to put a little polling question up for you. And what we want to know is, can you select the 3 types of OAIS actors? So let's see if we can, the poll is now open. So what are the 3 types of OAIS actors? You get 4 choices, and which one do you think is the most appropriate? And hopefully as panelists you can answer this question.
This is Becky. It actually says that organizers and panelists.
If not, just type your letter down in chat, A, B, C, or D, whichever one you think it is, and we'll just go forward from there. So the 3 types of OAIS actors. Well, you know what? Most of you got it right. It's A, the producers, management, and consumers. Now, I know some of you really would like it if we had groupies in there, but we'll have to, that'll be a different presentation on how to get groupies. All right, let's do a different poll. So we'll close that one. And then our next question is, can you select the 3 types of OAIS information packages? Again, you have 4 choices. Pick the one that you think. If you can't select it from the poll, just type in, and most of you are selecting C. That's right. SIPs, AIPs, DIPs. The S in SIP stands for submission. The A in AIP stands for archival. And the D in DIP stands for dissemination. So don't forget, use the word SAD, and it'll help you remember the packets and the order that they go in. All right, so finally, we have 7 OAIS actions and functions. And I'm going to give you a description of what the function does. And using the drawing tools, I want you to place a mark next to which OAIS function you think it is. Okay, so, all right. And I'm going to have to go back and get you the first one. So, yep, that is the first one. All right. The first function receives submissions, SIPs, from and performs quality assurance on SIPs. It generates descriptive information and creates AIPs. So let's see if your drawing is available to you. And if it is, we want you to go ahead and mark it on the thing. You can try your highlighter too. I'm seeing ingest as the selected option. Yes, ingest is this first OAIS function. All right. The next OAIS function receives AIP. Whoops. We've got, let me go back and start that one again. All right. All right, this function receives AIPs from ingest, adds them to permanent storage, and handles disaster recovery and provides AIPs to access to fulfill orders. So which one of the functions is this? So which receives, yep, there we go, archival storage. That's the correct answer. All right. The next function supports the populating, maintenance, and accessing of both descriptive information and administrative data, administers the OAIS database, performs queries, and updates and generates reports. So yes, data management, that's the one that handles this particular OAIS function. This function is responsible for the overall operation of the archive system, manages system configuration, controls physical access to the system, and establishes standards and policies. So who is responsible for the overall operation of archive system? Yeah, the administration. That's that one. Very good. Now this function provides both provides and appropriately restricts consumers' ability to discover, request, and receive information from the archives, including DIPs. So which function handles the ability to discover, request, and receive information from the archives? And that would be access. Yes, excellent. Now this last function monitors the environment for important changes in technology or the needs of the designated community and develops migration plans, software plans, and test plans. And the correct answer is preservation planning. Yes. Now the final function is common services, which are the supporting services that you have to have in place for a computer system to operate and perform, such as backup, exception handling. Now the function has to be there, but we don't normally talk about it as part of the reference model. So another way to look at the OAIS, we start with the actor's point of view. The producer submits the information to the archives, which is managed by management, and the OAIS delivers the information to the consumer, who is part of the designated community. From an information point of view, we start with the submission information package. It's submitted by the producer. It becomes the archival information package under management, which in turn produces the dissemination information package for the consumer. And finally, if you look at the actions or functions, the process begins with ingest, taking in the information, preserving it in the archival storage, and finally making it available through the access function. So now we come back to the basic OAIS model that we started with. Now that you are familiar with the terms and the processes of an OAIS, you will have a better understanding as you attend your SERI Institute classes. So are there any questions? If so, go ahead and type them in chat. We certainly want to make sure that you walk away with the basics, some of the vocabulary and things like that. And while you're typing up your questions, then we want to take a look at the bibliography. There's a comment in the chat that the pattern of the question suggests a linear response choice. There is a little bit. It isn't always linear, but from a very simplistic point of view, to give you the idea, we want it to start with linear. Then we can introduce the exceptions later on. So the exceptions will come to you as you get to know a little more about this. Here are some of the sources we use to put together our presentation. And here are some additional ones. So if you are interested in learning lots more about it, we will certainly be glad to do that. I'd like to, if there are no questions today, I'd like to thank Becky Julson for serving as my producer. And then for additional reading, Dr. Cal Lee, who will be teaching at your institute, has an article on the OAIS reference model. We will send you a link to that article after our webinar today. So we would like to thank you for participating in today in the OAIS webinar, and we hope you have a great week. We do have a comment. The OAIS model is the key standard. And yes, we could have shuffled the answers to make you think a little more, but in a short 40-minute presentation, I wanted you to get the concept and the flow. And hopefully, now that you kind of have the flow, the next time you see those questions, they might be shuffled, and you'll be able to pick out where they were. So I want to thank everyone for attending today. If you have any other questions, we would welcome those. If not, thank you so much, and I hope you'll enjoy your SERI Institute next week. Have a great time, and you guys have a great weekend. Take care.